We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C. this week, we continue to inch closer and closer to the potential of a 2018 Farm Bill. Saw some action on that front as the House and Senate move closer and closer towards the conference process. And Phil, there's potential that we could really start seeing some real legitimate, not just behind the scenes action, but some actual real in front of cameras and reporters kind of action here on that Farm Bill in the very near future.
Possible. We're going to be getting a bit of a jam here because the House goes on recess after next week, and so whether we're actually going to have this big session with the full conference committee, and there are over 40 members of the conference committee in the House. Whether we can get that in next week, not sure. We may have a meeting, however, of the 4 people who actually will do the real hard negotiating. That's the chairman and ranking Democrats on the House and Senate Agriculture Committees. They very well may meet next week to kind of go over some of the initial issues. Try to get a lay of the land, kind of where things are going. But a lot of it is then going to continue to be behind the scenes. The vast majority of this is actually going to be behind the scenes through the month of August, into the fall. Still saying they want to get this done by September 30th. Boy, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, the month of September is traditionally a pretty busy one here in Washington as they try and fund the government for a new fiscal year and do all of the other various things that are usually set to expire at the end of a fiscal year. And this year, that includes a Farm Bill. And so in the conference process, though, Phil, it sounds like the one of the major sticking points that we are seeing now is one of the same major sticking points that we saw several months ago. The panels, or the 2 different chambers, are going to have to come to some kind of an agreement on the nutrition title.
Right, and the issue there is whether you tighten work requirements for food stamp recipients, people on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Of course, a major feature of the House bill, House-passed bill, which had no Democratic support, was to increase the number of people in their 50s, people with children over the age of 6. They were now the work requirements were expanded to them under the House bill. None of that is in the Senate bill. House Republicans want to say they've got to see something, some changes on work requirements in a final bill. And so the big question is, can they come to something, some tweaks that Senate Democrats can accept, and will allow House Republicans to say they made some progress on this particular issue. We'll have to see. Chairman of House Agriculture Committee, Mike Conaway, said they held some things back in committee that he didn't say what those were, but they held some things back in committee that they could bring out in the conference negotiations that will be starting very soon.
And Phil, we obviously know the legislation expires on September 30th. But is there any flexibility in that deadline that we should be watching for?
Absolutely, there very much is. There are a number of programs that run out of money after September 30th, smaller programs generally. But it's important to remember that crop insurance is permanently authorized by Congress. Congress doesn't need to do anything for crop insurance. And for the commodity programs, most of them run with the marketing year, and so they are authorized into next year as well for this year's crops. And the margin protection program, which is probably the most important one for us to remember, is authorized through the end of December. That's important because once this bill expires, it triggers permanent law. Many of you remember this has happened before. It's been triggered in when previous farm bill expires. What happens there is you go back to these old price supports, and if Congress were to do nothing, you would see the government having to buy up dairy products in order to raise the price of dairy. That doesn't happen until the end of December. So that's a deadline. Another deadline, quite frankly, probably more important than September 30th, possibly, is the November elections. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons that we will get a farm bill this year, is there's a certain understanding of the anxiety out in farm country over trade policy, and Republicans in Congress really feel the need to do something. If they don't get it passed by November, to have it on the way to the president's desk by then.
All right. So obviously the Farm Bill remains the dominant conversation here in ag policy world here in Washington, but there are a few other things that we want to quickly mention before we let you go here today. And first one being that a number of House leaders have introduced a ag labor immigration bill that is something that's been in the works for some time. We've seen some votes on some ag labor bills here in this Congress. Those votes are unsuccessful. You may remember that kind of ensnared the Farm Bill there for a brief period of time as well. But this bill that we saw here introduced this week, Phil, it sounds like there could be some consideration on that sooner rather than later, potentially.
As soon as next week. The House Republican leadership promised this vote on a standalone bill that would authorize a new replacement for the H-2A program. It also would be paired with a mandatory E-Verify bill. The big question is, it's not clear that they would even have the votes for this next week, and it's a possibility. They may pair it with something else. I was just talking to the chairman of the Conservative House Freedom Caucus, who said that it may have to be paired with a child reunification provisions to deal with the border issue to have a real chance of passing. So stay tuned.
Yep. Obviously something to follow there. One last thing to mention, and this was something that was announced Thursday morning by Senate Environment and Public Works Committee Chair John Brasher, who said at the beginning of a committee hearing to consider some other nominations, that Andrew Wheeler, who is of course the acting administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, will appear before that committee really for the first time since his confirmation hearing to address the committee on August 1st. And so obviously a number of lawmakers very interested to hear how he's going to handle the agency on a wide variety of fronts. A lot of very conservative Republicans were not exactly thrilled with the administration of the renewable fuel standard. A lot of very liberal Democrats were not exactly thrilled with the just basically anything Scott Pruitt did at the Environmental Protection Agency, and they're going to be looking to get some answers on how Andrew Wheeler plans to run the agency as well. I expect a number of questions, I would assume, on the renewable fuel standard. I think that's an assumption I feel comfortable making.
Yeah.
But obviously a lot of folks are going to be paying very close attention to that August 1st hearing. But I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.